Alrighty, I'd like to welcome all of you to our session on impact investing. This is a particularly important one to me. We're at the end of the day. This is a modest crowd, but I hope we're going to make this really one of the more thoughtful and interesting sessions that you see at Global Conference. Every year, and by the way, my colleague Dave Chen will introduce the rest of our panel in a minute. The Milken Institute has supported what's now the Morgan Stanley Sustainable Investing Challenge. This is a phenomenal competition. Dave will talk about it a little bit more, in which business schools from all over the United States and now around the world have students compete in a series of competitions leading to a final for the best socially focused business plan. I'm assuming everyone in this room is probably adept on definitions of impact investing, both financial return and social returns. I won't spend a lot of time on that, except to say that one of our great interests is in trying to expand, scale, spread this notion. It's taking off in the institutional world. It's certainly taking off in the customer world. I am waiting for the day when I used to have a pension plan, but now on my 403B, running a nonprofit, that I'll have a checkbox for my impact selection, and I'm hoping Alex Friedman will provide me that investment product. So without further ado, what I want to do is introduce you to Dave Chen, who's really involved in this area in a multitude of ways. Dave runs a large fund that's an active investor and manager of impact assets. Dave is also a professor at Kellogg. You have promised me that the fix was not in this year. This is actually, I think, the first year we have a Kellogg team here, but I am told that Dave was not involved in the judging. So I can promise you, I guess, that we had an objective process and that Dave Chen had nothing to do with Kellogg's victory. So this is a team from Northwestern that I'm going to ask Dave to introduce. They're going to, by the way, here's the process for today. Dave's going to introduce. They're going to spend a little bit of time on their plan, explaining exactly what their idea is. We'll chit-chat about it for a few minutes, and then what we're going to do is open it up for conversation. And what I would encourage is poking, prodding, new ideas, questions. Feel free to argue. Nothing is off balance as long as it's respectful. The objective is helping young people who both want to change the world and do it at scale, think through the challenges of moving from plan to execution. So that's one of the reasons why we're here. So I look forward to your involvement in that. Dave. Dave Chen.
Thank you. Can I have the first slide up? So what I wanted to do this afternoon is just spend about 3 or 4 minutes introducing you to the what is now known as the Morgan Stanley Sustainable Investing Challenge. And let me take you back about 3 or 4 years ago, as the conversation about impact investing was really starting to take place. One of the things that we thought about was that at the very heart of it was rethinking finance, rethinking investment strategies. And at the heart of that was, can we influence, or even better, harness the MBAs and the innovation and the insights that were coming out of our finance students? And could we use finance itself as a source of innovation for impact? So we spent a lot of time talking about impact investing, the products, the social enterprise, but we didn't spend a lot of time talking about creating the next generation of impact investors or innovative instruments. And so 4 years ago, we started what was then known as the International Impact Investing Challenge. And it, very simply, we went out to the top business schools around the world, and we went out to their finance departments, and we asked if we could harness their innovative capacity and ask them to submit and challenge their students to submit great ideas, innovative ideas for investment strategies. Creative instruments, whether they be their own versions of carbon cap and trade or a social impact bond or a alternative investment strategy. And what we then did was, next slide, created this International Impact Investing Challenge. We're now in the 4th year of that. The first year we did it in New York, and we then were sponsored by the San Francisco Fed Reserve. And then last year we did it at the World Bank, and this year we were very, very pleasantly surprised and pleased to have Morgan Stanley join us as a long-term sponsor. Next. We now have over 39 schools from around the world participating, and it's really the who's who of the business schools, the London School of Economics, the London School of Business, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, Booth, etc. And we now have a permanent partner in Europe in this competition. That'll be INSEAD. And so we really are now getting to a global footprint around this. Next slide. We winnow down the process from 39 schools, and this year we had over 70 submissions from those 39 schools. We winnow this down through a series of briefings and competitions. So literally we're engaging now hundreds of judges. Almost all of them are investment professionals of one form or another. One of the things that we're actually doing is very consciously, very few of the investment professionals actually come from the impact world. They just come from the plain vanilla, whether they're public equities, whether they're hedge funds. And in some ways, we're now sort of spreading the word. And I think universally, the feedback from these judges is wow. They're amazed at the creativity that these students are putting into the ideas, rethinking how money can be put to work and investment strategies can be put to work, and the variety of asset classes that they're putting these things to work in. Next slide. We're also able this year, really, it was terrific. We ended up having Janine Galat just retired from CalPERS, talk about why CalPERS, as one of the largest institutional investors in the world, is now putting sustainability and ESG into the core of their investment protocols. And I think that was another example of giving these students just an inspiration that what they're doing is no longer viewed as fringe. It's now increasingly becoming part of the mainstream dialogue. Last thing. And so without further ado, what we just wanted to make sure that you had a sense of the schools that were represented in the final 10, of which we then got to the final 4, schools like Berkeley, Shanghai's Advanced Institute of Finance, and Shanghai Jiaotong University, Johns Hopkins, Yale. Yale was particularly interesting because they actually did a joint multiple school submission from the Yale School of Forestry, the Yale School of Business, and then they reached across the Atlantic to the London Business School. Said at Oxford, Darden at the University of Virginia, the Sustainable Management Program at Columbia, and then of course INSEAD. So it's really it's gratifying to see the breadth of participation that's taking place. So with that, I'm going to turn the rest of this presentation then over to the winning pitch and give you just a small flavor of the caliber of ideas and investment strategies that came out of this program. First, I'm going to introduce Nicole Chavez, and Laura Bremerkines, and April Mendez. And these were 3 of the team of 5.
Started at 5, then 4.
Team of students that came out of Kellogg.
Winnowing talent aggressively? Is it?
It's the classic thing that happens at a startup.
The old Jack Welch approach.
And then there were 3. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give them an idea what Fresh Coast Capital is all about.
And so I thought we'd each kind of give you a little bit of our background so you kind of know where we're coming from in approaching this idea that we came up with. So again, I'm Nicole Chavez. My background is primarily in the alternative investment industry, mostly hedge funds. And so 2008, being in the hedge fund industry, was very challenging, to say the least, and it really led me to do a lot of soul searching about what it was I wanted out of my career, what I wanted to be doing working in the finance world, and how that kind of fit in with the greater world itself. And so I kind of learned about impact investing and thought that would be a really great way for me to use my investment management background to invest in things that I really care about, which are urban revitalization, community development, and the environment. And so I thought, okay, let's go find a job in impact investing, and I quickly learned there were no jobs in impact investing, at least not very many. And so I realized that if I wanted to do this, I had to do it on my own, either doing something of my own or doing it from within a firm. And so I decided the best way to do that was to come to Kellogg, to take Professor Chen's impact investing class and to come up with an idea for this challenge. And so that was my goal all along. And the issue that I really wanted to tackle coming into this was one that kind of combined my interest in urban revitalization with my interest in the environment, which is brownfields, and that's what we'll be discussing in our presentation.
Hi, I'm Laura Kimes. I kind of come at this from a different angle. I studied environmental science and policy in undergrad, and I spent 3 summers going through pretty remote areas in the Midwest and the Southwest, taking soil samples and biomass samples, working my way through school over these summer jobs, literally getting my hands dirty. And I kind of had this turning point right at the end of undergrad where I realized I didn't want to just study environmental problems, climate change, et cetera, but really be part of the solution. And so that's been kind of my career evolution ever since then. I've spent the last 6 or 7 years working in the clean tech space, in energy efficiency and renewables, working for nonprofits, the EPA, and doing regulatory work for utilities. And I'm really excited that I think this concept that we'll talk to you about today kind of bring together all of that background in a really new way. I mean, that's been my point all along of going to Kellogg and bringing the MBA toolkit to some really serious environmental issues.
And I'm April Mendez, and my background is I've got a 14-year history so far in starting nonprofits. I've co-founded 2 nonprofits so far, and came to Kellogg in order to start to broaden my tool set in different ways that we might create social change, recognizing that the boundaries that nonprofits end up hitting up against in terms of availability of capital to scale their mission, kind of a scalability mindset in the way that we're tackling the issues that face us. And because I think that the nonprofit space lacks no creativity or talent, that's all present. The nonprofit space really struggles mostly with the finance side of things. That's why impact investing really caught my imagination, and I decided to pick up this challenge and learn more. And so that brings us into what the idea is that we came up with, which is the Fresh Coast Forest Fund. And as Nicole mentioned, it focuses specifically on trying to unlock hidden value in contaminated lands, largely in post-industrial communities. Those lands are known as brownfields. So if we could get the next slide. So the official definition of brownfields is that they are abandoned or underused properties that either are contaminated with toxins or are perceived to be contaminated. And because of that real or perceived contamination, they are slow to be redeveloped. They're not attractive to developers. Owners will sit on the land because they're concerned about the liability that comes along with putting the property on the market and then having the EPA recognize that this is contaminated property. So there are a couple of big issues that come along with brownfields. The first one is really the impact of those contaminants on the health of the local community and the environment itself. So we often see contaminants in the soil and in the groundwater. Those contaminants can move. They can become airborne. They can move from one space to another. So they're a real pest. And the second big challenge is what I mentioned before, which is how off-putting these properties are to developers, which means that these properties just sit abandoned for a very long time, and that continues to drive down the economic viability of the communities that they're in, and they're largely in already depressed and blighted communities, so they continue to just perpetuate that challenge. If we could grab the next slide. So we think this is a really big problem. In fact, everyone we've talked to thinks it's an enormous problem. Estimated 450,000 brownfield sites nationwide, and those are just the sites that have been identified. There's still a lot of work to do there and a lot more brownfields to be uncovered. That represents about 5 million acres of abandoned industrial land that would cover 60 of the largest cities in the United States. Collectively, eventually this becomes a $650 billion problem. That's the cost that would be estimated to clean up all of these sites through typical remediation or detoxification methods. If we could grab the next slide. The flip side of this is that if we're able to solve the brownfield problem, the positive impact is also significant. So property values in surrounding areas increase 5 to 15%. We see an increase of $11 billion in annual local tax revenues across the 500 urban areas in the United States. For every acre of brownfield that is reclaimed, we're saving 4.5 acres of countryside, so we're encouraging smart growth and reducing urban sprawl. And then, as I mentioned before, that brownfields are disproportionately located in communities that are already really depressed, and so we're helping to lift up the economic viability of those communities. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the solution that we're proposing is planting hybrid poplar tree farms on brownfields across the country. The reason that hybrid poplar tree farms are such a fascinating solution is that, first of all, these poplar trees are incredibly fast growing, and they can produce cash-producing wood products in as few as 4 years. And in addition to that, simply planting these trees on these abandoned urban sites helps to raise the property value and already helps to raise the quality of life in the community, because you now have a productive and a green use for these previously abandoned properties. And finally, the big kicker here is really that hybrid poplar trees are a proven natural way to remediate the contaminants in land. So they can remediate the contaminants within the soil and groundwater within 1 to 10 years in sites that are appropriately chosen for those trees and the types of contaminants that are present. All of that leads to long-term appreciation of the land value. So we've appreciated land value first just by providing a green and productive use, and then secondly by actually taking care of the contamination problem that held that land back in the first place. We could grab the next slide. So this is the structure of the fund that we're proposing, or the solution that we're proposing. So we would be capturing 6 to 11% returns through really 2 strategies. The first is the sale of the timber product. We're looking at pulp, paper, and timber mills, as well as fuel for biomass energy. And then the second source of returns is through the land value appreciation from getting a real estate promote on that land value appreciation, and then also offering remediation services to private landowners. And then the next slide. So there are a number of reasons that brownfields just don't move, why this is such an intractable issue. The first is that, generally speaking, brownfield redevelopment is done site by site. So for every brownfield site, you have to find an appropriate and profitable use for that site. Secondly, they're already in economically depressed areas, so developers are already scared off by those areas. The cleanup costs for typical mechanical remediation methods are sky high, averaging $57,000 an acre, and they can go up to as much as $500,000 an acre, so it's pretty costly. And then finally, developers are also scared off by the technical expertise that they would need to deal in remediation, and also the liability that's opened up. If we can get the next slide. So poplars provide a pretty interesting solution to this. We simplify the solution by saying that we're simply planting trees on all of these brownfields. We don't have to find a unique use for each site. Trees will generate cash even in the most economically depressed areas. The cost for remediation through the natural means of poplar planting reduces the cost by 80 to 90% over typical remediation methods. And finally, because we are going to be specialized in brownfields, it makes it worthwhile for us as a company to invest in the technical expertise and the liability mitigation strategies that will be essential to making this successful. Next slide, please. So in summary of the kind of basic idea, we're bringing together two existing strategies. First is poplars as a proven method for remediation that's verified by decades of research. And the second is poplars as planted for forest products. This is beautifully illustrated by a company called Greenwood Resources, which manages over 32,000 acres of poplar trees and has demonstrated its profitability. Greenwood was actually acquired by TIAA-CREF in 2012. So we think that the Fresh Coast Forest Fund does a nice job of combining these two proven strategies and scaling them to create really competitive social, environmental, and economic returns.
Okay, so next slide. So again, this is just a list of the returns that April had mentioned, and we'll kind of walk through each one individually. So next slide. So the first source is selling our wood into the pulp, paper, and timber market. So this is our 8-year rotation wood, and it's a very well-established, very mature market, $27 billion market with expected annual growth of 5.5% over the next 5 years. And this map shows us the locations of the wood-using mills, which if you were to look at a similar map of where there's heavy concentrations of brownfields, matches up pretty well. Next slide. Our second source of returns is selling the wood for biomass power. And this is where we can use our shorter rotation woods. We can harvest wood for this purpose in as quickly as 4 years. And wood products can be used to supply biomass power plants and modular power facilities. And so 38 million tons of wood were used for biomass power last year, which produced 5 times the wattage of solar PV. And the US spent $1.2 billion on biomass for electric power in 2013. So again, very substantial market.
And actually, just to add on that last slide, there's a Supreme Court ruling that I'm sure many of you may have seen just yesterday that opens up continues the regulation of carbon dioxide, which I think will tie in nicely to this this market as well.
Great. So next slide. And then thirdly, and very critical to our return profile, is the land value appreciation. So brownfields are effectively worth nothing. But then as a result of our trees and the remediation benefits that they provide, we can bring the property values up to market value and make that land worth tens of thousands of dollars. And so we want to monetize that through a couple of opportunities. We can either negotiate an equity promote that gives us 15 to 20% of that appreciation, or negotiate a remediation fee with a private landowner. Next slide. And so obviously we're not going to be able to do this on every single piece of land, and so we want to make sure we have some very tight investment criteria to help us make the proper site selection in planting our farms. And so these are some of the elements of that site selection criteria. For example, sites shouldn't have significant structures that we would have to tear down. If they're contaminated, they need to be approved for remediation through planting trees. Minimum 40-acre plot, appropriate market access to be able to sell the wood. Favorable growth conditions for poplar trees, which is a very resilient plant that can grow in a lot of different environments. And then patient development potential. We need the owners to give us control for 8 to 16 years in order to get the full cycle of the trees. And so while it's hard to estimate at this point exactly how many acres that is, we believe that given the 5 million acres of brownfield lands that are conservatively estimated at this time, if even 10% of that land fit our criteria, that's 500,000 acres that we'd be able to plant on. And that number doesn't include currently operating industrial land that we could that could use our services to help meet EPA requirements. Next slide. And so this is just a snapshot of what the fund looks like. We expect for the first series to raise $50 million to plant across 25,000 acres. And then for the second series, we expect to be able to scale up to $250 million to plant across 125,000 acres. Next slide. And so this is a snapshot of what the return profile looks like. So for a 10-year investment, we'd expect to earn 6.5% returns, which would put us right within the range of a typical timber investment. The typical timber return is 5 to 8%. And then for a 20-year investment, which allows an investor to reap more of the benefits from the land appreciation and also take advantage of cost-effective replantings on the sites, we expect a 10.8% return. Next slide. And then from a cash perspective, this is what the cash flows of a $5 million investment would look like. So starting at year 4, cash distributions would start once we start harvesting the biomass farms. And so we expect to see a 1.7x cash multiple for a 10-year investment and a 3.4x cash multiple for a 20-year investment. Next slide. And then in addition, we're talking about poplar trees, but we think there's a lot of additional opportunities that we're going to be researching for additional return enhancement. So diversifying crops, switchgrass and willows. Other types of poplar products, biochar, cellulosic ethanol, very early in their development. And then also just ways that we can monetize ecosystem services. Next slide. And so just to kind of wrap up, we really see this as a powerful way to create profit for investors while also making very significant impact on the communities. And we see it as a win-win-win scenario. So the environment wins, we're cleaning up soil and groundwater, and then planting trees, which helps with carbon sequestration and air quality. The community impact is extremely significant. So landowners get to experience the increase in their property values. Municipalities get back the tax revenues that they've been losing out on all these years. And then, of course, the people who live near these brownfields no longer have to have the negative psychological effects of living near these blighted properties. And then, of course, the investors get the returns while at the same time knowing that their dollars went towards making impact. So you can go to the next slide. It's just a list of all the people that we spoke to who helped us throughout the whole process. We've got them kind of covering all the different areas. A lot of our research was done in Gary, Indiana, which is sort of the prototype for the type of community that we think would benefit a lot from our product. But obviously, there's implications for the entire country. And then the last slide just has our contact info.
Good. So maybe before we go out to the audience, so get your questions ready. So I've got a question. What could go wrong?
Well, I think one of the things as we were talking through this over the last 5 months now, has really been site selection. I think that's really where the rubber meets the road, and so we're this summer working to put together a database of all of the site criteria that you heard Nicole talk about. Including ways to pick the right site that has contaminants that definitely can be remediated by the trees, that would not be, for example, Superfund sites of the most riskiest kind. There's a certain profile of site that we definitely would target. So and the liability issues that go along with that, that we're proposing to actually lease the land to mitigate any risk that would otherwise come from direct ownership.
Okay. Others?
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the importance of the partnerships that we make. We need to connect with the EPA and make sure they know what we're doing and that they're supportive of it. We need to connect with the communities to make sure that they understand what's going on. There's potential. You need to make sure that the community understands that you're growing this tree farm next to their home, but maybe one day it comes in and it's all harvested and it's gone, and then those benefits that they thought they were getting suddenly aren't there anymore. So they need to be prepared for that and recognize that it's being harvested to either continue to grow again, or because now that land's ready for housing or commercial activity or a park. So connecting with the community, making sure that they know why we're there and what we're offering them is very important also.
So one of the final challenges is finding enough sites in urban areas that are closely located enough to make it worthwhile for us to do the farm planting. So when we're talking about urban areas, oftentimes you've got 1 acre plot sites. So we're not going to be able to go with the smaller plot sites and cobble a bunch of those together. We'll have to have municipalities that have larger plot sizes available to us. And so that's one of the key pieces.
Alex, so we want to get it on tape. So what we're going to do is we have one handheld mic in the room, so raised hands. We'll come over here first and look forward to your questions. Alex.
Sounds really awesome. Super cool idea. I guess a couple quick questions. One, and these are not financial stuff. One, do you have lots of kind of risk around disease for the trees, forest fires, irrigation, all that kind of stuff? How do you model that out? Is it uniform across the country? It must be very different in different locations.
Yeah.
And then also, how come the returns aren't higher? How could you get them higher?
Do you want to start with the forest?
Yeah, to answer the question about the forest, I mean, I think the approach here in a lot of ways is not very different from, for example, what greenwood or other groups that plant trees do already. It's something that the risks can be mitigated. I think, you know, in terms of irrigation and things like that, one of the interesting things about hybrid poplars is it's a species of, or it's a tree that's been basically bred to withstand certain conditions. And so hybrid poplars is actually a really broad term for a lot of different particular plant types that could, you know, for example, if it needs to withstand higher drought conditions, perhaps plant, maybe not in LA, of course, but you know, that's definitely one thing that, for example, could help with that. And then the second question.
And then the returns.
Yeah.
So we were being very, very conservative with the returns. Just we didn't want to oversell what we were doing, and for the purposes of the competition, we only had so much time to do the research. One area we think there could be a lot of opportunity is working with current industry, with the oil companies, the mining companies, and providing them services to their current land to meet EPA requirements or get whatever credits they need for their purposes. And that's something we haven't modeled in yet, and we think that that's going to be a major source of returns as we continue on this project. So we're being very conservative to start, but now we have a lot of time to really dig into the opportunity set.
I'd say another possibility there is in some cases we may want to outright purchase the property, purchase the land, and then we would see the full value of the appreciation. And that's a piece that we haven't yet modeled out.
Question? So I've got one just about poplars because I don't know the tree. Is there any risk of toxicity, of absorption of some kind of material in the tree material that, for example, I mean, I'm envisioning homes being built in the proximate community and then the litigation starting 8 years later when somebody says we have a cancer concentration site or something.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah, I'll start that off. So that's definitely something that was probably the first question as we heard about kind of the concept of phytoremediation that we as a team had to tackle. And basically we try to think of this in sort of two buckets. The first is, if you look at the definition that April covered at the very beginning, there's the sort of bucket of land that is perceived contaminated. And so of course there wouldn't be any contamination issues with that because there are not contaminants. It's just perceived because it's been abandoned, whatever. So if you're looking though at the bucket of land where there are contaminants, there are a couple of different ways that the land can be remediated through these poplar trees. And the first, well, I guess just in general, when you plant a poplar or any tree really, there's physical ways and there's chemical ways that the pollutants in the soil can be trapped. And so it can either be trapped in the tissue of the tree and pose no harm from, for example, if you were to take the tree and burn it through a biomass, bioenergy production, there would be a scrubber on that facility similar to any, well, just like you would for any facility. And so that would take care of those contaminants. Also, if for certain other contaminants, if you were to plant the tree, it would sort of, the chemical in the soil would be pulled up through the tree and chemically changed into an inert state, and so no issues there either. This is something that's been studied by the USDA Forest Service for 20, 30 years, and it's also something that the EPA has published a primer on phytoremediation, and it's not something that they're doing in every case across the country, but it's definitely a viable option that they do use.
Yeah, and one of our favorite case studies as we went through this process, there are some nonprofits doing these on very small research bases, but in Elkhart, Indiana, which is the RV capital of the world, they manufacture RVs there, and there's a company that makes the wood veneer paneling for the interior of the RVs, and they've been importing all of their wood, 20 million panels a year, from Italy. And so they said, how can we get a local source of wood for our product? And the solution was there was a 10-acre brownfield in the city that had been vacant for 50 years. It had been a railroad roadhouse. and they planted poplar trees on there, and now that's going to be their source of wood for these veneers. So as long as nobody's eating the veneers on the inside of the RV and ingesting it, just the fact of living in the RV was deemed to be perfectly fine. So those are some of the kind of neat things that are happening in this space that we really want to scale up.
And I note that there must have been a marketing twist associated with the name of your company, because instead of kind of formerly toxic trees Inc., it's Fresh Coast.
Right.
It's Fresh Coast Forest. Who wouldn't want wood from Fresh Coast Forest? Anyone have a question out in the audience? Question right here, second row. Thank you.
When you purchase the land and the land sold, is there an EPA study that's required?
It depends on the land. If the land is, if it's a site that's been identified as a brownfield site previously, then yes, we'll definitely need to be working closely with that EPA representative for each state. And that's part of the strategy, actually, as we go out and start scaling this up, and particularly our first pilot site is to develop those relationships with the EPA so that they also understand what we're doing and getting ahead of that too.
There's an action that they issue, a no further action letter that you get at the end of the remediation. You've tested the soil and
Right.
demonstrated that it's fit.
Right, and actually that's a great point. That at the beginning of the process, there's also the opportunity to get a letter of comfort from that state or sometimes even federal EPA to ensure that we wouldn't be litigated against or something like that.
Question? So I've got a question about the competition. So what was the most unexpected question that you got, the most out of left field question that you got from any judge during the entire process?
We did unexpectedly have a judge that had a background in timber and asked a very specific question about the cost of wood pelletization. And Laura happened to, do you remember the question and the answer?
I don't remember the specific question, but I think what he was getting at was, have you looked at the European wood pellet market? And obviously the answer was yes, and we communicated that, and phew, but yeah, we definitely talked to a lot of biomass people. I think the one thing that we haven't mentioned is, so we're all part-time students, and so we.
You had day jobs to deal with while you were preparing for the competition.
Right,
That's
exactly.
That's a good thing. And what was the hardest question, do you think? So that was maybe unanticipated, but I mean, it kind of in a sense goes back to my first question: what could go wrong? Mm-hmm. What was the most significant challenge that was posed to you during the competition?
Well, I think for me personally, I think that we have a solid answer to it, but the question that always comes up is the one that you asked about, is the timber potentially harmful? And actually, surprisingly, we didn't get that question until the very end of the day. But yeah, that
people were feeling cranky at that question here in the front row.
So it's an exciting concept that you've come up with, but translating from concept to reality is often two things. So you really can't get started until you have the money. Right? So have you identified potential investors, either, high net worth individuals who have a reason to want to finance something like this, or institutional investors?
Want to take that one?
We have identified some potentials. Nothing I would want to speak to now, but I think we have some potentials for some strategic investors in the timber industry, also some high net worth investors. Especially what's neat about this concept is that people feel very emotionally connected to where they're from, and so especially somewhere like Northwest Indiana, there's people who made a lot of money in the steel industry or whatnot, and they want to give back to the community, and they see this and they think, oh, I can drive my kids past this tree farm and tell them that my money went to this tree farm. So I think there might be a lot of really interesting opportunities to even localize what we're doing, in terms of seeking money to go into a specific area as part of our investment process.
If I can take a crack at that.
Sure.
One of the things that's happened, as you all know, and many of you are lassoed into being judges at social enterprise and social venture competitions, and in that case, there are now incubators and various things that that are being conceived of or existing to help these student teams now actually see that to fruition. And I don't mean to make light of this, but you know, three students and a dog in the proverbial garage, and you can get a product company up and going. The one challenge we've had, and that is that this competition is about fund management or innovative financial vehicles. And it's pretty rare for 3 students and a dog in a garage to become a fund manager. And so one of the things that we've challenged ourselves with, and I think we're working now with a number of sponsors, financial services institutions, to now push. We've now gone into our 4th year, and you can see the quality and the commitment and the thinking. I mean, frankly, some of these this pitch and frankly many of the pitches in the 10 every year are you know, in some ways on par with the kinds of things that you see being pitched at you. And so these are ideas that deserve to be worked on. And so I think one of the things that we're going to be doing over the course of the next year, between Kellogg, INSEAD, myself, and our sponsor, Morgan Stanley, is to sit down and think about how we can build the facilities to either mentor, shelter, a fellowship, incubate this inside of another existing asset management firm. How do we now, you know, a lot of skills need to be brought together to actually bring together a fund. It isn't just the idea. And so this is something that we're actually working on, and if there are folks here that are interested in thinking about that and participating, we'd certainly love to bring you into that.
I have a follow-up question on that, but first let's go to the audience.
Also related to this, in seeing these kinds of projects, there's often, I saw the 10-year fund, and it seems to me that that's a challenge by itself. And there are green bonds, it's very incipient, it's only in very specific areas, but it seems to me that there should be something more liquid in between. I'm surprised it doesn't exist, and it might have to be across various projects, that there would be a bond that would be specified to go into various vehicles. But I wonder if you've given thought to whether there could be, and maybe this may be more a question for Dave, but whether there could be a bond, a liquid bond, creating that market so that finding those 10-year investors is not such a challenge.
I think there's really 2 answers to that question. I think that we're certainly looking into how we do something along that lines, whether it's a bond or whether it's a fund to create funds from these student projects. But I also think that the second thing is I think across the board, we're watching the 10-year fund life becoming a very challenged instrument. What we took as a natural standard way of doing business in the fund management world, I think, is coming under a lot of, not so much scrutiny, but just, is it really achieving the results? And I think that one of the most exciting things that comes out of this competition is that, in fact, we're giving the students the permission in their plans to actually experiment what are the alternative vehicles to capture value and to express value, both the ecological, social, as well as the financial values, in non-10-year fund instruments. And that's one of the most exciting things that you actually start to see, is very different alternative forms of capital receptacles.
So I've got a follow-up question on that, which relates to one of Alex's couple questions at the beginning. You're starting, you're new entrepreneurs. You've run a couple enterprises, but they've both been nonprofits. So fundamentally, you're folks without a track record in this world. You're offering a modest rate of return. You have to figure out a way to get into somebody's office, get their attention, and ultimately get them to pull out the checkbook. Did you think about financial instruments, financing mechanisms, leverage, et cetera, to the return a bit? That's a technical term. To try to create more attention, more excitement. Because if all you're offering is what experienced players in the industry is offering, why should somebody take a bet on a new team?
That's a lot of questions there.
Yep. I didn't say it would be easy.
I think we were, you know, it's hard with trying to, you want to be innovative, but you don't want to scare people. You know, I think if I could have done this, I'd have made a 20-year fund, but you know, who's going to buy a 20-year fund? And so you need to match, you know, you need to be innovative, but also give something that investors want. And I think Dave has said multiple times in class last quarter, you can change the strategy, you can change the form, but don't change the strategy on the form, because then you'll just, you know, confuse everybody. And so I think that was a battle for us, was how to, you know, change a strategy or change a form in a way, but also give people something that they understand. And I think that's something we're going to keep looking at going forward. How can we be innovative, but also, you know, give people something they can understand and want to get on board with?
Other reactions?
Well, I would say the differentiator here is that we're adding the environmental impact, the environmental and social impact to an existing fund strategy. So, you know, Greenwood's work is a existing timber fund that focuses on poplar tree farms grown on greenfield sites. It doesn't have yet the, you know, the environmental and social impact that we're proposing.
So that leads to my next question, which is, and I'll go back to the audience. As a socially focused investment, right? As an impact investment, forgetting about the discussions you've had so far, who do you see as the most likely candidates for this? Is this PRI stuff for foundations? Is this Is this family offices that have a social focus in their investment strategy? Individuals. Who are the most likely buyers? If you had a PPM in this room right now, who would be most likely to pick it up?
I mean, I would expect our investors to be anyone who wants that combination of the current cash income with the long-term appreciation that you get from the trees and from the real estate aspect of it. And so I think that could be high net worth. I think it'd be family office. I think it'd be institutional. It just depends on what bucket they're trying to fit in their asset allocation. And I think that there's a place for that. This is not. We are looking for competitive returns. This is not. This is not a charity. This is not a PRI situation. We want this to be a competitive fund that can fit into, any institutional investor's portfolio.
Can you talk about the assumptions around the upfront investment, in particular the land, what your assumptions are around what's going to cost for the land? I would think that there are many sites where people, if they've abandoned the site or if they're worried about toxic, they would either give it to you or they would pay you to take it away. Seriously? And so what have you assumed around those issues?
Do you want me to? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. We, in terms of assumptions, the city of Gary, for example, we had talked to them as just kind of a case study of sorts. And I think you're absolutely right that in the case of places like that where there's a lot of abandoned land, yes, the cities are looking to get rid of that land and would lease that land practically, basically $0 an acre over the length that we're looking at. So, yeah.
We modeled in a $5 per acre lease fee, but you're exactly right. We know in the city of Chicago they basically give land away for $1 a plot for land that needs to be remediated and have some kind of productive use, particularly in TIF districts or CRA districts.
Other questions? One right here.
Are there opportunities for a revenue stream to come from the carbon market or government subsidies, credits, anything in that area?
Yeah, we looked at a couple of different aspects of the carbon market. I think one of the most exciting ones that I personally see is on the bioenergy side, as in states where biomass is recognized as a contributor to the renewable portfolio standards. I think there might be some interesting things that we could do with that. We also have talked to folks about the California market for carbon credits and trying to do that from out of state, understand that is an option. And we haven't looked really deeply yet at that opportunity, but that's on the list for the next several months. And then also, I think an interesting interesting thought is in the cases where the land is going to be, it will have trees on the land for longer term than just the initial maybe 10 years, and perhaps a city where things are really not looking that great quite yet, and there are these trees for a really long period of time, then I think you could actually maybe capitalize on that for things like stormwater credits, things like carbon credits for the actual tree stand, not just the renewable energy aspect of it as well.
One more question from the audience, then we're going to go ahead.
So switchgrass came in number 2 and willows were 3. Does switchgrass have a shorter lifespan? Could it be a shorter term fund if you use switchgrass?
Yeah, I mean, it's a grass, it's not a tree.
How do you make money on switchgrass?
Yeah, I mean, switchgrass from a cellulosic ethanol perspective, is definitely a candidate species for that. And so that's something that I think would be really interesting for us as we were looking at sites in the Midwest in particular. As you look at what species are a good match for that particular site, I think switchgrass, just from the prairie perspective, would be a good option. But in terms of order on the slide, that no statement intended. And actually, there's a list of probably 10 to 15 other types of actual trees that could do the same remediation work that have been used and studied extensively by some of the researchers that we talked about earlier.
So I want to ask something completely off the plan, and I know what Dave Chen would say about this, and I know what I would, because I spend a lot of time with business students. But one of the things I'm always intrigued about is the proliferation of social enterprise interest across business schools in the United States and the world. And I'm interested in your view, the three of your view, about what this says kind of generationally, both about business school, people interested in this space, and maybe what it says about changes in America and around the world as people think about connecting investment and mission.
So I would say that this generational change has been an intentional change, in part that has been created by institutions that have placed a real priority on increasing the value that young people place on civic engagement and living a purpose-driven life. So, you think back to the founding of AmeriCorps in the mid-1990s, and before that you had City Year, Public Allies, Teach for America. They all came in around the same place. So this idea of having a domestic version of the Peace Corps to get young people thinking about the contributions that we are making to our own communities. I think that has now created in part this generational shift. We saw service learning become a requirement in the public schools. So we've seen massive increases in those rates of young people volunteering as a regular part of their lives. And I think part of that too then is young people are thinking more about what is my purpose, who am I? And asking that question very, very early, and being part of the civic fabric of society is a part of the answer to that question. And then, of course, we've seen the proliferation of undergraduate programs in social entrepreneurship, civic engagement centers on college campuses, and now I think over 150 management schools that offer some programming in social enterprise.
I think too with globalization, with the 24-hour news cycle, I remember when I was growing up, you'd hear about Nike, using sweatshops, and it was like, oh, that's bad, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And now, if you're, you see that Bangladesh, what happened to the Bangladesh factory, you can see it on TV in real time, and you can immediately connect the choices that you make to that terrible thing that you see. And so I think for the millennial generation, like, they can see all the choices that they make playing out immediately, and they want to be able to make sure that they're making choices that are not negatively impacting the world. And so I just think they're very in tune, and climate change especially is such a generational issue that we can also see happening every day. And I think that's something that millennials really care about and really want to make sure that their actions are not making that worse.
And to take it kind of personal, I know for myself, as I was looking at business schools, I obviously looked at the academics and that aspect too, but for me it was really important to have that social enterprise aspect of a curriculum, and Kellogg was definitely one of the best. I know, Nicole, you told a story at the challenge when we were being interviewed about how she saw on the website. Dave, I don't know if you know this. Nicole saw you on the Kellogg website when she applied, and she said, I want to do that. I want to go to that challenge.
This is the paid political announcement. I'm coming back. So I'm going to come back to Dave Chen at the end, but in less than 60 seconds each. You've got an audience. You've got an opportunity to interact with people during the last afternoon of Global Conference. What is the one thing you would ask people in this audience to do to help you and others that are similarly situated? 59. 50.
All right. Okay. So the first thing I would say is encourage young people that this is a viable career path, that they don't need to be dissuaded to go to law school or to be an engineer unless they're going to use law or engineering for social change, which is also a great opportunity. So mentorship is the first thing.
Are you saying in general or for our project?
57, 56.
I mean, just, yeah, like mentorship, partnership, introducing us to whoever you think can help us achieve our goals. Like we just, we want relationships, and we want to form relationships and share information and get things out of each other. And I think, that's what we're looking for, is connectiveness.
Yeah, and so you see our email addresses. If you have advice for us, please, if we don't get to talk to you today, send your advice our way. We're hoping to do a pilot tree farm in May of next year. And so any advice, potential partners, potential funders that you can send our way, please, we'd be glad to chat.
So before I turn it back to Dave to close it off, one of the things that we're very proud to do every year is to host the winners of this competition at Global Conference. So they've been here since Sunday night, and they've had a great opportunity to interact with this phenomenal relationship network and to have a sense of the power of networks and the opportunity the networks provide to create and expand businesses, finance businesses, and to scale really important social opportunities and missions. So we're really pleased that all three of you are with us. And now my old pal Dave Chen. What do you have to say for a couple minutes to close us off?
First and foremost, I think thank you to the Milken Institute and to the Global Conference. They've been supporters from almost the very first minute when we had this wacky idea that we would go out to business schools and see if we can't get the investment and finance students to be a source of impact innovation. And so again, thank you, and we hope to be back every year. This thing is only getting bigger, and to Paul's question about what's going on with this generation, I would only offer you one small anecdote. I was just recently with the chairman of finance, the finance department for Wharton, and he was sharing with me the fact that enrollments in the core investment classes have been declining, and my first reaction is, at Wharton? And 2 years ago, they started an impact investing class, and they asked actually a full professor to teach it as opposed to an adjunct like myself, who only pretends to do this. The big surprise is that they have 180 students in 3 sections, and that's a shock. I mean, think about that: 180 students in 3 sections at Wharton. And so I think that's just a litmus test, a symptom of what's going on here. And if anything, I don't want to take anything away from the Fresh Coast team. They did a fabulous job. They've thought about great idea, a great fund, but they're just one of many. And certainly any of the 10 could be up here. And I wanted to give you a flavor for challenging these students to use their finance tools, their Sharpe ratios, their alpha, their beta, their risk pricing, to try to create and flip problems on their heads and try to create scalable financial instruments. And I would just invite all of you to, if you have an interest, next year we're going to be doing this in London, which I think really makes a statement about the globalization of this effort and this initiative. Invite you to participate, and we're always looking for sponsors for the Morgan Stanley Sustainable Investing Challenge. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So join me, please, in thanking Dave for his great work and for the winning team from Fresh Coast.
Thank you again.